So a lot of things we can do with custom fields. Now, the other side of the coin with custom fields are these things called expandos, or the Expando API. So to programmatically create custom fields, we can leverage a specific API that we call the Expando API. So as we create a custom field in the front end or through the UI, in reality what's happening is we are calling the Expando API to create this custom field. So custom field, Expando field, they're the same thing. So logistically behind the scenes, what an Expando or what the Expando API does is it creates a virtual table that sort of joins with the table that we are extending. So we create an Expando table that may join the user table, for example. But let's dive into some of the more logistics of, well, first, why do we want to do this? So we may be progressing through different environments, right? Dev, QA, production. And if we were to create custom fields through the UI, you would have to create them in dev, QA, production. If these are very complicated custom fields, not only does it take a good amount of time to create them through the UI, but this could be prone to mistakes as well. So we can create custom fields programmatically, get it right the first time, and then you can deploy this throughout each one of your different environments. Right, so how do Expandos, or how does the Expando API look behind the scenes? The Expando API consists of 4 different tables within our database. Now, it's the Expando table, Expando row, column, and value. So each one of these is a specific table within our database. Now let's take a look at how this maps to a specific entity that we might be modifying. So starting off with the Expando table, we say this is the virtual table definition for a specific model class. So what this basically means is if I am modifying or adding a custom field for a user, then the Expando table is going to say, let's keep track of that. If I'm adding a custom field for a role, we're going to keep track of that within the Expando table. So using this specific class name ID, we're going to basically map, or we're going to have an entry here within the Expando table for each different model entity we are modifying. So we can have one for user, one for roles, one for site pages, and so on. So that's the Expando table. Just keeping track of where are we creating custom fields. What entity is going to have a custom field. The actual custom field itself is defined by the ExpandoColumn. So the ExpandoColumn is the actual custom field. So if I'm creating an employee ID, for example, for the user, in the Expando table, it'll see that I have, it'll have an entry for the user table. And then in the ExpandoColumn is where I specify the specific custom field, employee ID. So in the actual ExpandoColumn table, you'll see this specified under the name. The Expando row is seen in the database or in this Expando row table as the class PK. So this is an actual row. So the whole entity itself, the specific custom field, its value can all be seen within the Expando row. And finally, one of the most important here is the ExpandoValue. So you have a custom field for the user, for example, which is an employee ID. Now the actual value entered within the employee ID custom field is going to be stored here with the ExpandoValue. So the ExpandoValue is just that, the value for a specific custom field or ExpandoColumn, as we see within the database. So visually, it'll look a little something like this. So let's start over here on the right-hand side, and let's say our model class is the user. We've been using that example. And so as we're creating a custom field for the model class user, we're going to have an Expando table that's going to be joining with the user, so the model class user, right? From there, we'll have the ExpandoColumn or columns, which will be the custom field for each individual user. So each individual user will have that custom field defined within the ExpandoColumn. From there, the end user might enter a specific value for that custom field. That's going to be stored within the ExpandoValue. So my user, I enter the employee ID number. It's stored within the ExpandoValue. We may have a number of custom fields or multiple ExpandoColumn values. The summation of each one of these values for each one of these columns is going to be the ExpandoRow. Okay. So when we're working with this in the back end within the actual code itself, there are a number of services that we can call for the Expando table service, or local service. And each one follows the same pattern, right? If we want to do something with the ExpandoColumn, right, we have ExpandoColumn local service or ExpandoColumn service, either local or remote services, and so on for each one of the other two, ExpandoRow and ExpandoValue. So let's take a look at code here and try to further solidify this idea. So let's say we're creating a custom field for a specific entity, right? So what we're first going to try to do is we're going to try to get this specific Expando table, right? If we are able to get the Expando table, this means that we have already created a custom field for that specific entity. So we will have one table entry for each one of the different entities that we're modifying or adding a custom field for. So if I've already created a custom field for the entity, this default table will already be there. Otherwise, if we have not created a custom field for this entity, we're going to go ahead and add that default table entry so that we can signify and say, I have added a custom field here. Okay, so that's the first part. The second part is we're going to take a look at the ExpandoValue, right? So the ExpandoValue here is the actual value that we can enter within the custom field or the ExpandoColumn that we create. So using the theme display object to help us get some Liferay specific attributes, we're going to use that theme display object to get the company ID. This is the ID number that corresponds with our Liferay instance. From there, we're going to go ahead and get the Expando table ID, right? So the ID number for the Expando table is going to be signifying which entity we're going to be modifying. From there, we have the Expando table, knowing which entity we're adding the ExpandoColumn to, or grabbing the ExpandoColumn from in this situation. So Expando table, we're going to get the ExpandoColumn ID based off of its ID number. So grab the custom field for a specific entity. From there, we're going to get this class name ID for the user. And then once we have the user, we're going to call the ExpandoValue local service to add a value to the custom field class name ID, right? And that's going to be kind of the long story short here for our example of ExpandoValue. Now, if we want to show this value in the UI, we can use this Liferay UI custom attribute list to specify which entity are we going to be displaying the custom field from. So with all of that, let's go ahead. We're going to take a look at an example in which we're going to be implementing the Expando API to create a custom field. So this is going to be a pretty simple one. We're going to be adding an ID number for our user. Now we're going to be adding this ID number programmatically whenever the user logs in, but after they log in. So after the user logs in, we're going to be adding this ID number as a custom field for our user. So taking a look at some of the steps here, we're going to start off by creating a module project. This will be the API module project. We'll define our Gradle dependencies. We'll then create and implement the component as a post-login event listener. We'll talk about that as we go through the exercise. And then we'll implement the methods needed in order to add the functionality to create or add the custom field as the user logs in. Whew. So that's a mouthful there. Let's go ahead and take a look at the code, and we'll kind of further dive into this example.